Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Just 6 years ago, the world was watching as two longtime enemies in the Horn of Africa embraced historic peace. But today, they're right back on the brink of conflict. So how did it all go so wrong? Let's dive in. This was the phrase on everyone's lips back then. Let's tear down the wall and build a bridge. It just perfectly captured this incredible feeling of hope in 2018. This promise that, finally, decades of bitterness were actually coming to an end.
To really get what's happening now, we have to go back and understand the unbelievable optimism of that moment.
I mean, think about it. After a 20-year standoff that cost tens of thousands of lives, these steps felt like a miracle. Ethiopia's decision to finally accept the Algiers peace deal was this huge, stunning policy reversal. And then just a few months later, the borders physically reopened. Can you imagine the scenes in places like Zalambesa? Just tears and cheers as families who had been separated for 2 decades could finally cross over and embrace. But here's the thing. As soon as those borders opened, all that euphoria ran headfirst into a really messy reality on the ground. Why? Because the peace deal was never actually formalized with clear rules. Trade just exploded overnight. It was a total free-for-all. You had traders like this guy, Gibber Meskel, driving from Eritrea to sell electronics, then loading up on essential Ethiopian goods like teff and cement to take back. This was happening constantly, this massive, unregulated flow of goods moving back and forth with no customs, no tariffs, literally zero official systems in place. And with no official systems, you get financial chaos. Now look at these numbers, because this is where it gets wild. With no official exchange rate, money changers on the street were just making up the rules. Your 100 Eritrean nakfa might get you 100 Ethiopian birr right at the border. But if you traveled just 100 kilometers inland to Makalla, suddenly it was worth double. This kind of volatility created huge uncertainty, and it sparked serious problems like severe fuel shortages, as smugglers jumped in to exploit these price gaps. And economists saw this coming from a mile away. They were sounding the alarm with warnings just like this one. The very same economic issues, currency, trade rules that helped cause the first war were being completely ignored. So you had the big handshake, but the really hard work, the work of building a sustainable peace, just wasn't happening. The seeds of the next conflict were being planted right then and there. So even with all these economic cracks forming under the surface, the political friendship between the two leaders actually got deeper. It even led to a military alliance during Ethiopia's devastating Tigray War. But, ironically, the end of that very war would become the final breaking point for their entire relationship. And this right here, the Pretoria Agreement, this was the moment everything changed. This deal, signed in South Africa, was supposed to be another step towards peace, officially ending that brutal 2-year war in Tigray. But for the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea, it became the turning point. And for one critical reason. And here it is. This is the fatal flaw. Eritrea, which had fought as Ethiopia's main military partner and suffered enormous casualties, was not a signatory. They were completely left out of the peace accord. After fighting and dying alongside their allies, they weren't even in the room. No seat at the table. You have to understand the immense price Eritrea paid in this war. We're talking about reports of widespread forced conscription, even of children and refugees. So imagine paying that price in blood, only to be completely shut out of the peace process at the end. For Eritrea, this was seen as a profound betrayal. The trust just evaporated, and the entire foundation of their alliance started to crumble.
Okay, so that brings us to today. And that crumbling alliance has now given way to a dangerous new reality, one that's defined by open suspicion and really hostile language. All that trust is gone. What's left is this dangerous cycle of back-and-forth accusations. Ethiopia claims Eritrea is backing armed groups to cause trouble inside its borders, and Eritrea looks at Ethiopia's new, very public push for Red Sea access and sees it as a direct threat, a thinly veiled excuse to invade and take its ports. And let me be clear, this is not just talk. The rhetoric is escalating into real action. Eritrea's president is now openly talking about a new round of war. And then, in a move that's just dripping with symbolism, Ethiopia hosted a conference for an armed Eritrean opposition group.
in the very same building where peace was once celebrated. With both sides reportedly preparing for a fight, international diplomats are sounding the alarm, loud and clear.
And you have to remember, this is all happening in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. There's a civil war raging in Sudan, instability in the Red Sea, and ongoing conflict in Somalia. A new war between Ethiopia and Eritrea wouldn't stay contained. It could easily spill over and merge with these other crises, creating an absolutely catastrophic domino effect across the entire Horn of Africa.
So that hopeful bridge of 2018, it feels like it's been torn down, replaced by the same old walls of suspicion and hostility that stood for 20 years. And the question that leaves us with is, can that bridge ever be rebuilt before it's too late?